involved so deeply into the history of the railroads in Kentucky. So with that, I'm going to mute myself, and we will have a period of time for questions afterwards, but I will mute myself now and let Mr. Bogart, our speaker, take over.
Well, thank you. I first saw light in Kenton County. I was born at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Covington, Kentucky, all the way back in 1940. So, hey, I guess I can claim Kenton County, although they immediately took me to Campbell County and got me out of Kenton County, and grew up in Newport and Fort Thomas and area. Lived in Newport next to C&O tracks. Went to school at St. Stephen's next to the L&N tracks on Saratoga. So that's where my roots in the railroad is. It has stayed there. The young lady I married lived out on Dixie Highway, directly across the street from Blessed Sacrament Church. I still find it very interesting. I mean, you walked out the front door of her house directly across to the church. She came out of the house, she got in the limousine that made a U-turn on Dixie Highway, and she got out. She was not going to walk across Dixie Highway in her wedding gown. So, okay. So I got some Northern Kentucky roots. So I think I go up here and I minimize myself up here, and then I start clicking and the show should start if I did this semi-right. Okay, hopefully I am up and on the screen, and hopefully you're seeing a screen that says Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington Railroad, a pawn in the great game. We're going to be talking basically about Lexington, Northern Kentucky area. But in 1790, Lexington, Kentucky was the largest inland city west of the Appalachian Mountains, but Lexington is not on a river. It's a strange town. Lexington got its supplies by wagons coming from the east to Wheeling, Virginia, flatboat down the Ohio River to Limestone, Kentucky, now Maysville, and then wagon on into Lexington. Lexington shipped its goods to market by wagon to Frankfort, Kentucky, flatboat down the Kentucky, Ohio, Mississippi River to New Orleans. Very expensive way to move goods. You move goods about 100 miles by wagon, and their cost double. Not their value, their cost double. And this is how Lexington got their stuff. Yes? We okay? Lexington down the Ohio River to Limestone, wagon into Lexington, then shipping out, wagon to Frankfort, down the Kentucky, and down the Ohio. But in 1800, we get the rise of the Northern Kentucky cities and of Louisville and the other things. Newport at one time was, I think, the 99th largest city in the United States, and Covington was a little bit bigger. So Lexington is losing out on being the big city. So Lexington in 1800 decided to build a canal. They were going to canalize the Kentucky River from Carrollton to Frankfort, go up Elkhorn Creek to the Forks, this is canal, South Elkhorn to Town Branch into Lexington. Do not ask me where they were going to get the water for this. I don't think they thought this part out. And the canal basin was the with the L&N yard, now R.J. Corman's yard. So if you're familiar with Lexington, this is the Lexington Cemetery, downtown Lexington. This is R.J. Corman's yard, Rupp Arena's here, and this is where this canal basin was going to be. And this is their plan. This is Town Branch, South Elkhorn, down the Kentucky River. This was all to be canalized. They actually canalized the Kentucky River to Frankfort, and there is Lock and Dam number 4. After it was rebuilt by the Corps of Engineers in the 1880s. This all basically fell apart by the time of the Civil War. It was very poorly built. And then the Commonwealth got the Corps to come in and build the series of 14 locks and dams from Carrollton all the way up to Beattyville. Another story, another time. In 1832, Lexington abandons the canal because they've heard about the railroad. And they're going to build a railroad from Lexington to Frankfort to Christiansburg, LaGrange, Louisville, and Portland. Actually, it's going to Portland, Kentucky. at the lower end of the falls. If it had been built like it was supposed to be built, there would be no Louisville, Kentucky. There would have been a Portland, Kentucky. It did not get built like it was supposed to be built. The Lexington, Ohio modeled their railroad on the Baltimore and Ohio, and they're going to use limestone sills, and they built it to standard gauge. Standard gauge being 4 feet, 8.5 inches. That's what all the railroads in the United States and Canada and Mexico are now, 4 feet, 8.5. They're going to do it with local money. Subscriptions going to be paid for each mile built. Let me back up on this. Now, I think this is neat the way they did this. They took the subscription book into the big tavern in town, laid it out, and a couple of mucky mucks signed their names. They're going to buy X number of shares at $100. Now the pressure is on to the rest of you guys to put your name in the book and buy it, or other people are going to talk, how come Joe Blow isn't putting his name, or Mickey Spano isn't putting his name down? So people put their names down. But what's going to turn out is we're going to find out people don't have money in Kentucky. Henry Clay, well, I think it's 5 shares he puts down for. When they get to his third share of $300, Henry Clay doesn't have any money. He doesn't have any money. No, they have all their money tied up in land, slaves, livestock, and that. They borrow money every year to plant. They pay off, and any surplus they have, they invest wisely. They buy a bigger house, fix fancier stuff, and that. It's all for show. There is very little money in Kentucky. I saw some figure that said that they figured in 1850 there was enough money in Kentucky to give everybody in Kentucky 13 cents. I will repeat, 13 cents. This is what they're going to build. This is the first set of limestone sills. The strap iron, as you can see, is being laid down on here. Every 18 inches, they drill a hole, put a plug in it, and then they drive the spike down through the rail to hold it in place. They do put a tow path down. They are going to run a steam locomotive. They get smarter, they get on, and they put their strap iron here. I'm most probably getting ahead of myself. You're going to read that the locomotive was a failure. The locomotive was not a failure. This was the failure. There was no give, and it just beat the locomotive to death as it ran down the tracks. But anyway, here's the plan. Come out of Lexington to Frankfort, over to Christiansburg, up to LaGrange. The reason they're swinging up, it's Eastwood Hills here. Come on down through Louisville to Portland at the lower end of the falls. Louisville puts the kish on this. They don't want the railroad. They're a riverport town. Interestingly, halfway between Frankfort and Lexington and Frankfort, they hit a farm. The farmer says, if you're going to buy a right away, you're buying the whole farm. They buy it, and it becomes the town in Midway, Kentucky. I pulled this off the internet. I should go over and take the picture. Here's the track through town. We're looking, excuse me, towards Frankfort. Another view, Mr. Corman coming through. This is the McKee Monument. McKee was one of the owners of the Lexington, Ohio. He was an engineer, and he's killed at the Battle of Buena Vista. Lieutenant Colonel with the 2nd Kentucky. The commanding officer, Henry Clay Jr., is also killed. But Midway's a neat little town to go to. Okay, 1835, the Lexington, Ohio gets to Frankfort. This is what gets built. They get from Portland to the Louisville city limits. When Louisville gets an injunction and won't allow, steam locomotives are bad. They're going to scare the horses. So they get this part built into Frankfort. It gets here in 1836. This is how we wind up with all the Irish in Kentucky, because they bring the Irish in to do all this work. Now the entrance to Frankfort is by an incline, a 300-foot hill down. This is halfway up this hill. They lower the cars one by one down to Broadway. They roll down Broadway. The Kentucky River's here, where they have their wharf boat to load to ship the goods on out or bring the goods in. This works fairly well till the rope breaks one day with a passenger car on. Number of people injured, one killed, and thereafter nobody would ride the incline down, but they did lower the cars down. It's never really profitable. They can't move enough goods. Cost is high. A number of things happen. Okay, let's talk about some other cities. Cincinnati and Louisville, Kentucky are also all of a sudden becoming railroad conscious about 1850. And then you got two other cities that are also becoming railroad conscious. Maysville, Kentucky and Madison, Indiana. All want to build south from their cities into the southern states. There is also a major player in this, the Cincinnati and Charleston Railroad. There are major meetings. Congress is involved into this. They're going to build a railroad from Charleston, South Carolina to Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, it looked very great on the map. If you didn't take and consider topography, they build part of from Charleston until they get in the mountains. They actually dig a tunnel that never gets used. It's building 5-foot gauge, which is generally called the southern gauge. It just never gets finished, but it'd been neat if it'd been built. The cities of Cincinnati, Louisville, and Maysville start building their railroads in Kentucky. Maysville's going to build a railroad like this, coming out of Maysville, down to Paris, to Lexington, on up around to Louisville, down to Portland, below the canal. The idea is shipping coming down the Ohio River. There is problems with water here and here, very low water. You will offload it, put it on the train. The train will take it down around here and reload it on the steamboat. It never gets off the ground. Maysville, by the way, is going to build to 4 feet, 8.5 inches. And this is the problem. If you've been to Maysville, you know it's stuck down here in this valley. And coming up out of the valley, they just can't quite master the hill with the technology of the day. Louisville jumps in on it, and it builds the Louisville-Nashville South like this. And they build the Louisville and Lexington coming up around the Eastwood Hills, down to Christiansburg, and into Frankfort. It's strange. They build this track to 5 foot. They build this to standard gauge, 4 foot, 8.5. Okay. Now I need to back up over here, coming down out of Cincinnati. And I may be going to repeat myself. This is the Covington and Lexington Railroad. It is built to 5 foot gauge for some silly reason, down to Paris. The Lexington Maysville is built from Lexington to Paris to standard gauge. So what we got is a standard gauge track that comes over here, over to here, to here. Then we got broad gauge here. Coming out of Lexington, which is supposed to go down here, but never gets any farther than Nicholasville, is the Lexington-Danville Railroad. And it is built to 5 foot gauge. There we go. Okay, just went through this. The Maysville and Lexington goes into receivership. The Covington Lexington is a Cincinnati, Queen City deal. It's Cincinnati businessmen. And they convert the Covington and Lexington to 5 foot gauge. Lexington Danville's 5 foot. They connect that. So what we got now is track from Covington down to Lexington to Nicholasville. It does not connect with the track from Louisville to Lexington because they're two different gauges. They track from Cincinnati, Covington more correctly, down to Nicholasville. They operate as the Kentucky Central. There is no Kentucky Central Railroad. The Kentucky Central Railroad that you all know of is a separate corporation that it comes in existence after the Civil War. This is simply a trade name that they use because these are still 3 separate railroads. They have not merged this to this. This is separate. So these guys sell the tickets and everything, and then they divvy the money up at the end of the month to whose railroad was used. 1849, okay, we did this. Uh, in 1849, the Lexington to Frankfort Railroad is sold, courthouse steps, and it becomes the Lexington and Frankfort Railroad. And they build a new right of way, which is the right of way we know today, that comes from Jet, Kentucky, down along the Kentucky River through a tunnel into Frankfort. The original railroad was inclined down through here. They've now built around, used the Irish to dig this tunnel here that comes through. Interestingly, this is Lexington and Frankfort coming here, Louisville and Frankfort coming here. You had to get off and go from one train to the other. They did this for a few silly years, then decided we just run the trains on through so you didn't have to switch trains in Frankfort anymore. They operate underneath the banner of the Louisville, Frankfort, and Lexington Railroad, but there is no such railroads in Louisville, Frankfort, and Lexington. This is simply a trading company, a ticket sales company, whatever you want to call it. There is no connection between the Lexington and Frankfort and with the Kentucky Central at Lexington. There's no connection with the Louisville and Frankfort with the L&N in Louisville. The Civil War comes along, and we got problems. The War Department is moving goods by ferry across the river to Covington, loading them on the train, which then takes them down to Lexington, where the goods have to be offloaded, put on a wagon, taken on over, put on the train to Louisville. They get to Louisville, they got offload the train, put it in a wagon, take it over, and reload it onto the L&N. This is going down for the campaign at Chattanooga. It will later be supplying the Sherman's campaign against Atlanta. The War Department says, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay you to convert the railroad between Lexington and Louisville 5-foot gauge. And we're going to make a connection between the track from Covington to Lexington. And we're going to make a connection between the track from Lexington to Louisville at Louisville. Lexington says, yes. Louisville says, over our dead body, are you going to do that? So the U.S. Army builds their own railroad at Louisville. And if you look at a map of Louisville during the Civil War, you're going to see the military railroad. And here's what we have. This is the track coming from Cincinnati or Covington all the way down to Lexington, come on around and comes here where it ends. This is the military railroad that's been put in. There is also a track that runs from Cincinnati out to Seymour, Indiana, I believe it is, down to Jeffersonville by ferry across. This is the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. So this is what they put in, the military does, to make a connecting track from Covington all the way to Louisville down here, and then it continues down to Chattanooga, Nashville, Chattanooga, and down to feeding the army of Sherman in front of Atlanta. So you guys are involved in the Atlanta campaign. Soon as the war is over with, the L&N takes up that track in Louisville, so that you good people in northern Kentucky and that, once your goods get to Louisville, you got to offload them and put them on a wagon, increasing the cost of transporting them. The Kentucky Central in 1867 reroutes itself, and it cuts its track south of Lexington down to Danville and walks away from it. And they start building a track from Paris to Winchester down to Ford, Kentucky, which will continue on south, as we know the CSX track today. In 1869, the Louisville and Frankfort and the Lexington and Frankfort are reorganized as the Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington Railroad. And they're going to build a rail line from LaGrange to Covington, which is called the Short Line. Even today, it's known as the Short Line. The depot at LaGrange. Okay. The LC&L is fought over on their charter. You got to get a charter from the Commonwealth of Kentucky to build a railroad. And if they get this thing built, that means you people in Covington and Cincinnati are going to now have an advantage of moving your goods a little bit cheaper to Louisville. So what they can't prevent them from getting their charter, but the track from Covington, I'll call it Covington, to LaGrange has to be built to 4 feet 9 inches, not 5 feet. So still, when you get to Louisville, you cannot do a direct connection. You got to unload your thing on a wagon and put it on over to the L&N and then reload the train. Louisville is really we know now why a lot of people hate Louisville. So here's the way you had been coming down to Paris, to Lexington, around to Frankfurt, up and around and into Louisville. This is the short line. This is the CSX track that you know today that swings down. It's called the short line because you can see it's much shorter. It's 114 miles long as opposed to 184 miles by doing the long way around. I assume you guys have all seen this trestle. It's been a little bit upgraded. There's a reservoir up here. You guys from Kenton County are going to tell me what it is. I should know what it is, but it's still there. 1872, Shelbyville, Kentucky, builds a tunnel through Eastwood Hill to get themselves a railroad. And what they do is build a tunnel through here, through Eastwood Hill and into Shelbyville. You notice it doesn't connect. There's a gap here. But they have their own little railroad that runs into them. Now in 1877, Cincinnati starts to build the Cincinnati Southern, Cincinnati to Chattanooga. Major fight with the Kentucky legislature. And they are very fortunate that Lexington and Danville Railroad that was kicked off, their charter allows them to build from Lexington to Danville and on to the Tennessee line. Wait a minute. Cincinnati will grab that charter and throw that in, and there is a major battle with getting their line built. It's very complicated, but the Cincinnati soon wins out and begins to build the Cincinnati Southern South. That's the Cincinnati Southern, is the bridge, the track that comes up through Erlanger and heads on down. The railroad, in case you don't know it, is owned by the city of Cincinnati. It is the railroad that owns the track is the Cincinnati Southern. Excuse me a second. They leased it to the Cincinnati New Orleans and Texas Pacific, CNO and TP. Excuse me. Who have granted track rights to Norfolk Southern to run over the track. Very interestingly, I've ridden that a couple times with Operation Lifesaver. As you go down the track, the Norfolk Southern people, as they reach various communities and talk to local officials, do not call themselves Norfolk Southern. They call themselves CNO and TP. When you get to Danville and you swing for Louisville, they're Norfolk Southern because that's not CNO and TP track. So I said this lease is up in 2026. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. So this is the Cincinnati Southern, CNO and TP coming down. They picked up that Lexington and Danville charter that allowed them to run all the way down, and they built all the way to Chattanooga. Better known as the Rat Hole, due to the tunnels. Okay, 1881, Collis P. Huntington steps in. He is going to build a transcontinental railroad. We just got done celebrating the building of the transcontinental railroad. It was a lie, people. It was not a transcontinental railroad. The Missouri River at Omaha was not bridged, and the railroad ended at Sacramento, California, not at San Francisco. Okay. There has only been one transcontinental railroad in the United States, and C.P. Huntington owned it for a very short time, and it ran from Newport News to Los Angeles. What he owned was the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, which got him from Newport News to Covington and Lexington, the Chesapeake, Ohio and Southwestern Railway that got him from Louisville to Memphis, Tennessee. Both are owned by the Newport News and Mississippi Valley Company, which was a C.P. Huntington holding company. Then from Memphis to New Orleans, he owned in Louisville, New Orleans, and Texas Railroad. And from New Orleans to LA, he owned the Southern Pacific Railroad. But his problem is this gap here, the Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington. He doesn't own it. He owns everything from here to California, and he owns everything from here to Newport News, but he does not own that. We got a problem because, okay, let me back up. Here's he's coming in. He has not had this gap finished. And he comes in down through here. He's bought the Kentucky Central, swings up. This is the original C&O track, by the way, Chesapeake and Ohio track, coming down Lexington and swinging up and coming into Covington this way. This is the track he needs to get his hands on. Bad picture, we won't worry about it. The L&N wants to buy the track to Louisville and Nashville. So C.C. Baldwin, the president of the L&N, and Collis P. Huntington agree that they will buy the railroad, the Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington, and divvy it up 50-50. However, the L&N is the sole owner of the Lexington, Cincinnati, and Louisville. And the C&O is sitting on the outside going, what happened? Well, here's what happened. C.P. Huntington is a skinflint, and they've decided they would buy the LC&L 50-50. And I cannot find the official amount of money, but we're going to say it's $10 million. And they walk in and sit down at the meeting, and LC&L says, yes, you can buy us for $10 million. Mr. Huntington says, that's too much money, and he walks out of the room. I assume he thinks he's going to get him to lower the price. Mr. Baldwin says, that's fair enough. Here's your $10 million. And Huntington says, what's going on? We agreed to divide it, 50-50. And Baldwin said, yes, we did. But you walked away from it, so I bought it. Uh-oh, Huntington's got problems. What happens is the L&N refuses him track rights from Covington down to Louisville via LaGrange. They will not give it that to him. They cannot use that Cincinnati, Louisville, which is the track he really wants to use. But they do tell him he can use the track from Lexington to Louisville. But there's all kind of contingents put on it. Between Lexington and Louisville, the C&O cannot pick up freight or drop off freight. They can pick up passengers only at Frankfort and Emnitz, pick up and drop off, the only places. So basically all the C&O is doing is running through there. They're not making any money. C&O also must pay the cost of the Louisville tar, MN, LaGrange tar, the Lexington tar, 50% of the two depots cost, plus 50% of maintenance way costs. Wow. Huntington's getting the shaft on this deal. In 1886, by the way, this is sort of dual gauge they're running through because Huntington is built to standard gauge, so he had to lay an extra rail to get from Lexington on over to Louisville. But in 1886, the Louisville Nashville converts all its track overnight to 4 feet 8 and 5 inches. They've hired farmers all over the South. They shut the railroad down for a day, and they bring these guys in. And all they do is pick up the rail and move it in 5 foot, which says, my math is bad, 3.5 inches. And they're back in operation. In 1888, 1889, a new player steps in, the Louisville Southern, and it's going to build a railroad from Louisville to Lexington. It offers track rights to the C&O, and it says, hey, guys, forget this riding on the L&N. Come over and use our railroad to get to Louisville from Lexington. It's 87 miles long versus 94 miles, and we'll be a little bit fair about where you can stop for passengers. No freight along the way. And here's the deal. This is how C&O is getting into Louisville from Lexington. Here's the Louisville Southern Railroad coming in to Lexington. And this is what they're offering to move the C&O over to. The L&N's got such a sweetheart deal with them. They don't want to see them lose the C&O. So what the C&O is going to do is buy the Shelbyville line that runs from Shelbyville from HK Tar over to Shelbyville and extended on over to Christiansburg. This, by the way, is Louisville. I should have tossed this in. This is Louisville Southern coming in, running around this way to get into Central Depot. This is the L&N swinging around, coming up to get to Union Depot. This is the C&O coming in, getting to Central Depot down here. So if they use the Louisville Southern, C&O still gets to the same depot. This is the track that he lost going out here. This is the Chesapeake and Ohio Southwestern that he lost. I didn't mention it. When he didn't get the LC&L, everything turned into a house of cards, and Huntington loses the Chesapeake and Ohio Southwestern, and he loses the Louisville, New Orleans, and Texas. He hangs on to the Southern Pacific, and he hangs on to Chesapeake and Ohio, but he loses the other two railroads. This is the depot that the C&O's using in Louisville and the Louisville Southern's using. So they're going to be good. The L&N will buy the Shelbyville and extend it on over to Christiansburg. This route is 9 miles shorter. Wow. So we've done this, and the L&N buys this track here. And they're going to allow the C&O now to come across here. The C&O will now allow them to pick up people and drop people off at Shelbyville. Still no freight service. So here's what we wind up with. Here's the old way the C&O got into. Here's the track coming out of Covington down through LaGrange and in. Here's our track coming up out of Lexington, the old route. The C&O will now come up to Christiansburg, cut over here through Shelbyville and up. What is really weird about this is the Louisville Nashville continues to run all the way around like this in their freight and passenger service. As I'm showing, the L&N is running like this. C&O is running like this. Louisville Southern running like this. This is Cincinnati Southern coming down. This is the L&N track coming down out of Cincinnati. The short line swinging over here. C&O track to Ashland. C&O track coming down from Ashland to Lexington. It's a good thing they did not take the Louisville Southern up on their offer. This is Young's High Bridge, Tyrone High Bridge. It still stands there. There's no track on it, but you can go out there and bungee jump off it for 180 bucks, 286 feet high on a Sunday afternoon. Once they collect your money, no refund if you don't jump off, but it's there. This is Christiansburg. And this is we know this is a C&O train coming through for Shelbyville. And we now know this is an L&N train swinging through. This is the Christiansburg Depot. Throw this in. I think I get this up. If not, I'll drop back. They, once again, can't drop off train. They can pick up passengers at Frankfort and Shelbyville. There's the Shelbyville Depot. That is a C&O train. The depot still stands, but it's been moved. They can drop off passengers at Anchorage on the way there, but they cannot drop off. They cannot pick up passengers on the way to Louisville. They can pick up passengers out of the way at Louisville, at Anchorage on the way to Lexington, but not drop passengers off. These are costs the C&O must pay on this new track getting into. MN Tar still, HK Tar, CB Tar, GM Tar, 50% of the cost plus the maintenance cost. Okay, let me go back here. Talk about what happens is. As I said, the L&N routes its trains up like this. The C&O comes in through Shelby County here. There's Christiansburg. There's a couple little towns out here. And the local guys say, hey, we want to go in our county seat to Shelbyville. And the C&O says, we're not allowed to pick up people. And the L&N runs their train up like this. So they take the L&N to the Kentucky Railway Commission. And the Kentucky Railway Commission says that the L&N must run 2 trains every day connecting Louisville to LaGrange to Christiansburg to Shelbyville to Louisville. They should not have written that, because the L&N says, okay, we will do exactly what you said. So in the morning, they take a train that comes out of here, up around here to Christiansburg, turns and heads to Shelbyville. So if you're a farmer out here, you're in good shape. You can get on the train. You can go into Shelbyville and do your business at the courthouse. Well, wait a minute. When the afternoon train shows up, it goes to Louisville and stops. I got to spend the night in Louisville and then get on the train and come all the way back around and get here. What I'm saying is they did what the Railroad Commission said. They just did not satisfy the needs of these people to provide them with a railroad connection that allowed them to go into Shelbyville, do their business, and come back out at the end of the day. Okay. There's HK Tar. The tar is not there, but if you hear people talk HK Tar, you say, I know where that is. This is the line from Lexington coming in. This is the line from Covington coming in to here. HK Tar is where they meet. And then this is the track on into Louisville. Okay, we got into that. This is what the L&N provides. As I said, they don't run this way. They run their track all the way like this up to Jackson and into the coal fields. We can do a whole story about what's happening up here. They just took out the Jackson Yard last month. No, okay, I got ahead of myself. Okay, I'm sorry. There's the loop that they do with their train, which does not meet the locals' need. Okay. Now, the L&N gets in trouble with the Railroad Commission because in 1910 it controls the railroad from Louisville to Frankfort, and then the track from Frankfort, the Lexington Eastern, which was that track that went up to central Kentucky, the Frankfort and Cincinnati, which did not go to Cincinnati but went to Georgetown and Paris, and the Louisville Atlantic, which went down to Nicholasville, Richmond, Ravenna. The L&N's really got a plan. By the way, the Frankfort and Cincinnati and Paris connected and went on up to Maysville. So they said, hey, you can't own all three railroads, interstate commerce and that. So the L&N spun off the Frankfort and Cincinnati. And here we can go back here. Coming into Frankfort, the L&N owns the Frankfort and Cincinnati, which gave them track rights to Maysville. They owned the Lexington Eastern, which brought them around to here and going up into eastern Kentucky. And they owned the Riney B of the Louisville Atlantic, which brought them down here and heading up in here. So this is what they spin off to keep this and keep this. They will get rid of this in the 1930s and just keep this line going. They sell the Maysville route, breaking it. Here's our route going up here. Need to talk about this. They built this big depot up in Maysville. Oops, back. This is what seems to be the plan. And we can't prove this, but this is the gut reaction, what we think is happening. The L&N has gotten control of all this. So they built this depot. They're having fights in the eastern Kentucky coal fields over who's going to do what. And they put out the rumor they're going to bridge the Ohio River at Maysville, build on north towards Cleveland and the Lake Erie ports, and build eastward over the Ohio coal fields. There's a major coal field over in here. We think what happens is this caused the Louisville and Nashville, the Chesapeake and Ohio, and Norfolk Western to get together in a back room somewhere and divvy up the eastern Kentucky coal fields. And the deal is the Norfolk and Western gets everything on Tug Fork, the C&O gets everything on the Louisa Fork, and the L&N gets everything on the Cumberland and the Kentucky River. Because you can see this whole change that happens in the dynamics of where they're building track to. And I think this was, and most people, railroad guys, historians are going to say, that was the deal with this. And that's the reason why they gave it up. It's also a very bad line. it comes in and swings because Maysville wanted to go this way. Instead of the track swinging that way, as it comes to Maysville, it swings east. This line's out of service, by the way. It washed out a couple of years ago. In 32, they abandoned the Ravenna track, as I said. This track is abandoned. This track is abandoned because what they do is they build a very good track coming down here from Winchester to Lexington from Patio Yard. The famous Red River Gorge trestles in here, and there's a couple other trestles are in here. Magnificent in that. This track is basically embargoed now. I do not understand CSX, okay? You would think that if you were shipping coal from Hazard down to Tennessee, you would bring it up like this, correct? Swing it here and bring it down like that. Wouldn't that what you'd be do? No, no, no. CSX is taking the coal now. There's actually a connection here. It comes around here, it comes up here, it comes up here, it comes up here, and then it comes down here. Do not ask me why they run it all the way around like that, and they don't run it like this and then turn it. Okay. 54, the L&N ends passenger service, and the C&O can now pick up passengers at Midway where the college is. The Winchester to Beattyville tracks. 71, the George Washington makes its last run from Ashland to Louisville, and from Cincinnati to Covington on up. And if I'd asked you a minute ago, what is the most famous passenger train in the world, the finest passenger train in the world, the best passenger train in the world, you guys would all said the George Washington, right? Correct. It is the last passenger train to use the C&O depot, the Covington depot, and then the Newport depot. The L&N train had gone through it earlier, so the George is the last train, passenger train. CSX gets formed in 1981. I don't know if you know the story of CSX and its name. I will bore you if you don't know the name. CSX gets its name because when they go to merge the chassis system with the seaboard system, which is the L&N has been merged into the seaboard system, C&O has been merged into the chassis system. Prime Osborne, the head of the seaboard system, Hay Watkins from Louisville, head of the chassis system, have this name that I can't remember. They're going to call the merge of the two railroads. As they're doing their documentation, the lawyers get tired of writing all this stuff out. So they start taking the standard abbreviation for the chassis system and for the seaboard system, and they do the abbreviation for this new railroad that's going to be formed as CSX. And when everything's approved in 1981, that the federal government says, yes, you can merge the chassis system and the seaboard system together and do this thing that you want to do, they're going to name this new company, whatever the name was, they Prime and Hayes had adopted, until the lawyer said, whoa, wait a minute, guys. All the documentation says the name of the railroad is going to be CSX. I don't know whether we want to change this or not. So they named the railroad CSX, which is a problem because if you look at any rail car and there's an X, the reporting mark, that means it is not owned by a railroad. It's a private corporation. So CSX has to rename itself CSX Transportation, and that's why you see CSXT on it. Okay. This is all stuff on the railroad, what they can do. In 82, they abandoned the rail line from Winchester to Lexington, used the L&N tracks. The 86, CSX abandons the Ashland to Lexington. But this is where it gets strange, because what CSX now does is what Huntington always wanted. In 1986, if Huntington had been around, he would have been jumping up and down in joy because CSX grants C&O rights to run from Covington to Louisville on the short line. This is the track that's been abandoned by C&O track in here. This is C&O track coming up here. And this is Newport Covington, and this is the map. They actually don't do away with, but they show as the C&O coming in like this, getting into Newport, cutting over the L&N track through Wilder into Latonia and heading down like this. This is what Mr. Huntington wanted so badly and never got. So in 1986, if he'd been around, he would have got this. In reality, what happened was the C&O came up here into Queensgate, the train was made up, and then it went out and down here. But to show to their customers, the C&O customers, Chessie customers, said, yeah, hey, we're still running from Newport News to Louisville. This is the map CSX put out. 2003, the track from Winchester to HK Tower is sold to R.J. Corman. CSX still maintains the track from Covington on down to LaGrange and in. Interestingly, CSX sells the track, notice that, not the right-of-way, to R.J. Corman. So the right-of-way is owned between Lexington and HK Tower by CSX. And then from HK Tower to Osborne Yard, and from Winchester Depot to Patio Yard, R.J. Corman runs on a track rightage. This is all abandoned stuff in Kentucky, track that's been abandoned. And so here's the way that in 86, Huntington would have been happy. His trains would have come down here, swung over here and come down like this into Louisville. In case you're wondering, this is the Carrollton Railroad. It's a separate railroad owned by CSX, but is a separate corporation. The red stuff is all track that has been abandoned in central Kentucky in the last 50 some years. This is the track up to Maysville. It is out of service. Major washout here. What they were doing was moving coal up here to a coal loadout, which was servicing 3 power plants on the Ohio side of the river who didn't have rail connections. And these power plants switched to gas, so there was no need for this railroad to come up there and serve. So when the track was washed out, they just walked away from it. And that's all, folks. It's a long, involved story of a railroad that's very important to you good people up in Kenton County. And the way it got twisted and turned around and what we have left today of it. So if you guys want to ask me any questions, I'd be happy to. And I will try and get myself so I'm back up here on the little screen and you are looking at me.
Well, let me jump in here and number one, say I'm so happy that we've recorded this program because it was really fascinating. And I know everybody's going to have a lot of questions. Now, to keep an orderly procedure for asking questions and everybody's not talking at once, Joe is going to tell us the procedure for you asking to ask a question of Mr. Bogart. So Joe, take it away.
All right, so if you see on your Zoom screen, there's something that says more. There is a chat there, but also there's a little set of emojis, and the first one has a little hand that looks like it's waving. If you click that hand, then I know you raised your hand. I can unmute you, and then you can ask the question, Mr. Bogart. I see somebody in the chat's already asked a question. Are the Latonia Rail Yards still active?
The Latonia Railroad Yard is owned by the Greater Cincinnati Railway Exposition. It's a museum. They are suffering some financial difficulties right now. A number of the people who had their private cars stored there have moved them. But the big problem was there is no market for private cars anymore. You'd buy a private car and you could hook it onto Amtrak and other things, or there was excursions run. The railroads, for a number of reasons, I don't know if any of you guys are lawyers, you damn lawyers, and insurance people have raised the premium so high that it's almost impossible to run a charter on the back of the train. So these guys are pulling their private cars out And we got 3 of them down at the Bluegrass Railroad Museum. And they're just sitting there, and they're supposedly going to come display cars. The Coursey Yard is still active. The northern end of the Coursey Yard, which is maybe the other one you're talking about at Taylor Mills, is CSX owned. They use some storage in there and do some local switching. The southern part of the yard is owned by Progress Rail, who has a rail car rebuilding shop there. So hopefully I've answered your question.
Anybody else have any questions?
We got another, don't we have another question on the chat?
Yes, it says, where can I find pictures of Richwood, Kensington, Walton, and Banklick stations?
Heck of a good question. And if you find them, I'd be happy to. The thing is, we know these pictures existed because in don't hold me to this, but I think it's 1919 or 1920, when the federal government turns loose of the railroads that they had sort of nationalized during World War I, the railroads were supposed to go out and take pictures of all their property, depots, tracks, and all this sort of stuff. The C&O Historical Society, I know, has a large collection of this. The L&N don't know quite what happened to it. University of Louisville has a collection of stuff in their L&N collection, but it's like your Rotary stuff. I think parts of it got thrown away that we should have been saved. And so this stuff just isn't there. You go looking for things, and it is very frustrating because you find all this neat stuff that really isn't neat, and the stuff that you really want isn't there. That's a bum answer I just gave you, but that's the best I can tell you.
Joe, this is Arnold. I'm not entirely sure I understood your telling us how to raise our hands.
So on the screen,
I think
at the
Daniel
bottom,
was raising his hand.
Who was that?
Daniel, I saw him wave. I don't know if he wanted to ask something.
Oh, okay. Let me unmute him then. Daniel Shadler. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that answer about the DeCourcy yards. I grew up in Alexandria, and with the winds were just right, we could hear the trains blowing their whistle as they went into and out of the DeCourcy yards.
That's Alexandria and not Alexandria.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm a Newport Catholic and Thomas More graduate as well.
Oh, okay. Why don't you just unmute everybody? Let everybody just jump in. It's no big deal.
All righty.
Not like we got 100 people out there.
There we go. Anybody else have any questions?
Ask your question.
I have a question. The railroad track from Cincinnati to between Covington and Cincinnati, there at Main Street in Covington, was called the C&O and the L&N, I believe, from time to time. But after the Civil War, the L&N took over Kentucky, sort of. So what would you call that railroad?
You're talking about the track from Covington down to Lexington.
No, I'm talking about the bridge between Covington and.
Oh, the bridge.
Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Okay, the bridge. The bridge between Covington and Cincinnati was built by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad.
Yeah.
So the track from KC Tar out by, I guess I can't remember what street that is, 12th I was going to say, in his C&O track. So L&N track is from there south. And that goes back to when Mr. Huntington got control of the Kentucky Central Railroad. So when he loses the Kentucky Central Railroad, he's sharp enough to keep the track from HK Tar over into the C&O bailiwick, and which was really should have gone the L&N to do. He does the same thing in Lexington when he loses the Kentucky Central. He managed to hang on to the track within the city of Louisville, city of Lexington, which we should have thought would go on to L&N. So he's at least smart enough, although he's losing his part of his empire, to hang on to a couple little key components of the deal.
Yeah. So the L&N, I read the L&N kind of took over in Kentucky after the Civil War.
Yeah, the L&N becomes the big gorilla in the place as it slowly takes over. You guys live up in northern Kentucky. I grew up in northern Kentucky. You don't know the dynamics of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You're all focused towards Ohio. I was too. And it was only when I came down to Frankfort, I began to learn the hatred of Louisville. And I couldn't understand why this huge hatred of Louisville. And Louisville, Nashville is part of this. The way they played things, keeping the Cincinnati Southern from being built. There was a lot of Kentucky people that wanted this railroad built for what it was going to do. From blocking the Cincinnati Southern, I didn't mention this within that divvying up, but the Cincinnati Southern is blocked from getting in the coal fields of eastern Kentucky. They're able to sneak in a couple places and that. So the L&N makes sure that you guys don't get in the coal fields. The Louisville is the Belknap is the large warehouse outfit. So if you're buying anything in Cincinnati, you got other places. The rest of the state has to buy from Belknap. They have to ship them by the Louisville, Nashville to get there. So they're always screwing you by their prices and that. And I will talk about something that's going on today and everything. But when the Civil War is over with, a large portion of the African-American population moves to Louisville. And they settle in Louisville. And you get where Jim Crow State, Kentucky is. The Jim Crow Northern Kentucky was way different from the rest of Kentucky, although we had a little Jim Crow up there. But if you were in Frankfort and the lady was walking down the sidewalk, the African-American gentleman was expected to step in the street. That didn't happen in Louisville. In Louisville, they rode public transportation. That didn't happen in Lexington. In Louisville, they paid them. In Lexington, you ran a line item at the store for them to buy stuff and everything. So the African Americans in Louisville did not know their place in society in the rest of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So, and then the other little thing that happened is, Daniel, you're the banker. Arnold wants to borrow some money. You really don't want to turn Arnold down, but you really got to. So you turn him down by saying, I'd love to loan you the money, but the people in Louisville won't let me do that. Or you're the insurance guy and you say, yeah, your claim should be paid, but the people in Louisville won't let me do this. So there is this huge hatred of Louisville that grows up, which I, growing up in Northern Kentucky, was totally shocked for when I got to Lexington, and also found out that I didn't know a cotton picking thing about the Civil War that was right. I thought the North had won the Civil War and done these other things, and I quickly found out I was wrong. And I was apparently the only guy in Kentucky who didn't have a relative who rode with John Hunt Morgan's Raiders. What do you mean? Your grandfather fought with the 108th Ohio. You know, what's going on with you? And he carried the torch to Atlanta? Whoa, wait a minute. Get rid of you. Okay. Sidetrack. We're not talking railroad.
Any other questions?
CNO comes into Covington there at 17th Street. You're right. I think you might have thought it'd be 12th Street, but it comes in
Yeah, 12th Street.
17th Street.
Yeah.
17th.
Yeah, and if you go down to 12th Street, I got another presentation if you guys ever want. You look at that Spanish-style building that sits there. That was the Railroad YMCA.
Oh, yeah. That's at 17th, though.
Yeah.
17th.
Well, on that note, Mr. Bogart, we certainly would like to have another presentation by you. I will send you an email and we can exchange some information about that. We will not have, we probably won't have any more meetings until February, any more programs until February.
Okay, well, what I will offer you is the travel down the L&N track from Cincinnati Union Terminal to Corbin, Kentucky, by postcards and pictures.
Oh,
Great. Well, well, folks, I know that you've enjoyed the presentation as much as I have, so let's give Mr. Bogart a round of applause and thanks for his presentation today.
Now I will tell you what you guys could really do for me. You could get me a 6-pack of Wiedemann beer. And see I get it. I worked at Wiedemann Brewery, and they now make it at a pub over in Cincinnati up on Vine Street.
Well, if we can get you here for a real person presentation, maybe in February, we will see that your need is met.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out as a joke at you guys. Okay,
All right.
I'm happy to do this by this. I'm happy to come up and talk to you guys, however you want to do it.
Okay, that's great. Joe, that seems to be about it. So you can shut us down. Everybody can just sign out. And thanks again, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.